Pinaceae is in a group of plants called the gymnosperms. Gymnosperm means naked seed, which is in contrast to the angiosperms with their seeds surrounded by ovaries. Does this drawing of plant reproductive parts look familiar? Well, for now you need to forget about it. There are no petals, no sepals, no stamens, and definitely no ovary. According to the USDA Plants database, this family contains 9 genera and 167 species. They occur naturally all over the northern hemisphere from the Arctic to the tropics and were introduced as timber products around the southern hemisphere. Pinaceae have tall, straight trunks with narrow crowns. If you've been to Alaska, you know that at its northern and altitudinal limits, the trees dwarf and the shape inverts. They are resinous. The bark can be furrowed and thick or scaly. They have needle-like evergreen leaves. Seeds are tucked inside a woody cone made up of scales. Species in this family can be very tall and very old, like the bristlecone pine. In Alaska, the Pinaceae family is represented by 5 genera and 9 species. Pine have needles and fascicles, groups of 2 in this case, with sheaths or papery coverings at the base. These sheaths are persistent in lodgepole pines that you see in Alaska and deciduous in others like white pines, which have 5 needles per fascicle. Tamarack have flexible needles in clusters attached on spur growths on the twigs with up to 20 needles per cluster. These needles are deciduous. Spruce have sharply pointed, stiff needles attached to peg-like projections on the twigs that make the branches feel rough when the needles are gone. Branches lose their needles readily when cut. The female cones hang down below the branches. Hemlock have short, blunt, soft needles, and the cones hang down. Fir only occur in very specific locations in southeastern Alaska. Their needles are flat and without stalks, making the twigs smooth. Their upright cones lose scales from their axes as they mature, so you won't find cones on the ground under this tree. Now for a quick look at the reproductive cycle of the gymnosperms and thus of the Pinaceae family. Gymnosperms don't have flowers, they have strobili, like horsetails and club mosses. You can call them cones. Pinaceae are monoecious, meaning they have both male and female reproductive parts on the same plant. The male pollen strobili, or pollen cones, are generally smaller than their female counterparts. They grow either solitarily or in clusters, generally at the axis of the branches, and mature in one season. They produce pollen, often in great quantity, and it spreads via wind. The female or pistillate strobili, cones, grow at the ends of branches and take 1 to 3 years to mature. They are made up of woody scales, and each scale has a subtending bract or modified leaf. Some cones, like those of Douglas fir, have very long bracts that stick out farther than the scales. There is an ovule on each scale that, when mature, is fertilized by the windblown pollen. Once pollinated, the scales close up to protect the ovule, and the 2 winged seeds develop on each scale. And once the seeds are mature and conditions are right, the cones open and release the seeds to the wind. Some trees are serotinous, meaning they protect and hold on to their seeds for a period of time, even for many years, and release the seeds when there are specific triggers like fire. This specifically is called pyrescence, when resin binds the cone shut until the heat from fire causes them to open and release the seeds. Serotiny is more of a tendency. For example, the spruce trees of interior Alaska are semi-serotinous. Some seeds will germinate and continue the cycle.